There is a kind of sacrifice that no one ever sees. Not the dramatic kind that makes the news or fills the pages of a book, but the quiet, grinding, invisible kind. The mother who skips dinner so her children can eat. The woman who smiles at the school gate so no one knows the lights were cut off last night. The person who holds herself together through the long shift not because she is strong, but because she does not have the luxury of falling apart. The world has a way of making poor people invisible. Not on purpose, perhaps, but invisibility is one of the cruelest things poverty does. It strips you of your story, makes you a background figure in everyone else's life, and convinces you, slowly and steadily, that you do not matter enough to be seen. Today, I want to tell you about a woman named Olivia, and about the night that someone finally saw her. Olivia had not always been poor. There had been a time, not long ago, though it felt like another lifetime, when things were not easy, but they were stable. She and her husband Wyatt had been building something small and honest together. A rental apartment with secondhand furniture and a kitchen table that wobbled unless you propped the leg just right. 2 boys, Noah and Liam, born on the same day in the same hospital room, filling the apartment with the particular noise and warmth of children who are genuinely, effortlessly happy. And Wyatt, steady, dependable, exhausted Wyatt, who drove his taxi 12, sometimes 14 hours a day because that was what the math required, and because he loved his family in the way of a man who shows love through showing up. He died on a Tuesday in February. Not from anything dramatic or violent. He died from exhaustion and a heart that had been pushed past its limits for too long. The doctors called it cardiac arrest. Olivia called it the world asking too much of a good man and getting exactly what it asked for. She was 29 years old when they buried him. The twins were 6. She had $42 in the checking account and 2 months of rent already overdue. I want you to understand what the years that followed actually looked like. Not in abstract terms, but in the specific, daily, grinding details that poverty lives in. It lived in the twins' shoes, which were the wrong size because the right size cost $11 more, and $11 was the difference between the electricity being on or off. It lived in the way Noah and Liam came home from school quieter than they used to be, and the way Olivia eventually learned that the other kids had started calling them the dirty brothers, because their clothes were worn thin and sometimes smelled of the damp that lived in the walls of their building. She washed everything by hand because the laundromat was $4 per load, and $4 was a meal. She washed and she hung and she sent them out as clean and as pressed as she could manage. And still, it was not enough. And there was nothing she could do about it. And that helplessness was its own kind of grief. She worked at the King's Crown, a restaurant that existed in a different world than the one Olivia lived in. A world of white tablecloths and wine lists and entrees that cost more than she made in a shift. She worked the back, the kitchen, the dishwashing station where the water was always too hot and the steam rose in columns and the plates came back in towers that seemed designed to make the work feel endless. She was good at it. She was fast. She did not complain. She took whatever shifts were available, and she took them without negotiating, because the word available was the only word that mattered. She left the apartment at 4 p.m. when the neighbor's daughter was home from school to sit with the twins. She came back after midnight. On the nights when the neighbor's daughter had plans, Olivia left food on the table and strict instructions and told Noah, who was 7 minutes older than Liam, and took the responsibility with a seriousness that broke her heart, that he was in charge. A 9-year-old boy in charge because his mother could not afford anything else. She came home on those nights and stood in the doorway of their room and watched them sleep and felt the particular kind of love that is almost indistinguishable from pain. The hunger was the hardest part, not her own hunger. She had become almost accustomed to the constant, low-grade emptiness that lived in her stomach, the way you become accustomed to a sound that never stops. Her hunger she could manage. It was the twins' hunger that undid her, the way Liam would go quiet at dinner when there was not much on the table. The way Noah would say he was not very hungry when she could see from his eyes that he was performing not hungry to leave more for her, and that a 9-year-old boy had already learned to perform not hungry for his mother. The night it changed started like every other night. The dinner service had been relentless. A private event, a full house, more dishes than usual, more steam and noise and heat. When the kitchen finally cleared and the last of the front-of-house staff finished their closing duties, Olivia was stacking the last of the clean plates when she saw what was going to the bin. It happened every night, to varying degrees. The restaurant operated at a level of excess that was simply a condition of its existence. Untouched portions returned from tables, whole dishes that had been prepared for an event and not served. Food that, in the world Olivia came home to every night, was not excess at all. It was the difference between her sons going to bed full or going to bed performing not hungry. She stood for a long moment. She looked at the bin. She looked at the remaining kitchen staff, who were talking among themselves, finishing their closing routines. She thought about Noah and Liam. She thought about the empty container in the refrigerator at home. She thought about the fact that this food was going in the garbage, and her children were hungry, and those two facts, existing simultaneously in the same world, felt like an accusation of something she had not done. She wrapped what she could in the paper bags they used for takeaway. She moved quickly and quietly and tried not to look like someone doing something wrong, because she did not believe she was doing something wrong, and yet the way her hands shook said otherwise. She walked home with the bag under her arm. What happened at the kitchen table that night was the kind of moment that stays with you. Noah and Liam were still awake. They always waited for her, another thing she had told them not to do, and another thing she did not have the heart to enforce. They saw the bag. Liam asked what it was. She put it on the table and opened it, and watched her sons look at real food, real meat, real vegetables, a portion of something expensive and fragrant that had been meant for someone who had left it on their plate, and watched them eat with the quiet, focused intensity of children who are genuinely, truly hungry. Noah looked up at her at some point and said, "Mom, this is the best thing I've ever had." And she smiled and agreed and went to the bathroom and cried for 3 minutes, and then washed her face and came back and asked if they wanted more. She kept doing it. Not every night, only when food was clearly headed for the bin, only the excess, only what would otherwise be nothing. She told herself this distinction mattered, and she believed it, and she also knew that what she was doing occupied a moral gray area she could not fully defend, and she did it anyway because her children were hungry. What she did not know was that her coworkers had noticed, not with sympathy. The kitchen staff at the King's Crown were not unkind people, most of them, but they operated within a particular culture of hierarchy and banter, and Olivia, quiet and private and always slightly apart from the group dynamic, was not a person they had learned to see clearly. They had developed a theory about the bags she left with. They thought she was feeding a stray dog. She was so thin, so drawn, that it did not occur to them the food was for children. It did not occur to them she had children at all. The chef, Fred, had made the stray dog joke first, and it had landed with the kitchen staff in the way of jokes that are mean in a way no one wants to fully acknowledge. Olivia heard it once. She kept her face entirely still and said nothing, and finished her shift and took her bag home to her sons. Swallowing your pride is a phrase people use casually. It is not a casual thing. It is a physical act, a deliberate suppression of a reaction that is entirely justified, in service of something more important. Olivia swallowed her pride every shift for weeks. She did it because Noah and Liam ate better on the nights she brought food home, and because that fact was larger than any other fact available to her. Stephen Brooks had bought the King's Crown 6 months earlier. He was the kind of businessman who had arrived at his current success through a series of experiences that had made him careful in some ways and blunt in others. He was not an unkind man by nature, though he had learned to lead in ways that sometimes read as cold. What he had been, recently, was betrayed. A previous business partner had stolen from him in a way that was both financially significant and personally devastating, and the wound was fresh enough that it had changed how he saw things. He had become suspicious. He had installed cameras in the restaurant 3 weeks into his ownership, telling himself it was good business practice, knowing also that it was about the money that had disappeared and the person he had trusted who had taken it. He reviewed the footage every few days. He was looking for the shape of theft, and he found it quickly, in the figure of Olivia wrapping food and leaving with bags. He watched the footage 3 times. He saw her moving carefully, quickly, thought he could see the calculation in her movements, the practiced quality of it. His chest tightened. Another one. Another person with access he had trusted, taking what was not theirs to take. He was angry in the specific way of someone who has been hurt before and is now being handed evidence that the world is exactly as untrustworthy as his worst experience taught him it was. He did not take time to think carefully. He looked up her address in the employee file. He drove. I want you to understand what this drive looked like from the inside of Stephen's car. He had practiced what he was going to say, the formal language of dismissal, the mention of legal consequences, the carefully constructed speech of a man who wanted to be professional and controlled, even in his anger. He drove through the city and then further, through the parts of the city that he did not usually drive through, where the streetlights were spaced further apart and some were not working, and the buildings had the particular exhausted quality of structures that have not been maintained in longer than they should have been. He drove, and the speech played in his head, and he felt entirely certain of what he was about to do. He was not certain of what he was about to see. Her building was the kind that you register instinctively as a place where people are surviving, not living. He found the apartment number and knocked on the door, and in the 30 seconds it took for someone to answer, he stood in the corridor and felt his certainty begin, almost imperceptibly, to waver. He could not have explained why. He told himself it was nothing. The door opened and Olivia stood there. She was wearing the clothes she had changed into after work, a sweatshirt that had been washed so many times it had lost its color, track pants with a small tear at the knee. Her hair was pulled back. She looked at him with an expression that moved through several things very quickly. Recognition, confusion, and then, and this was the thing that hit Stephen with an immediacy he had not been prepared for, fear. Real fear. The kind that happens in the body before the mind has time to construct it. He opened his mouth. He had the speech ready. He had practiced it the whole drive over. He looked past her into the apartment. The kitchen was visible from the doorway. The overhead light was the weak, yellowish kind that reveals rather than illuminates. It showed the cracked linoleum and the table that needed replacing, and the second-hand chairs and the 2 small boys who were sitting at that table, eating. They were eating the food from the bags she had brought home. He could see what it was. He could see the paper takeaway wrapping. He could see the way they were eating. Not the way children eat when food is abundant and unremarkable, but the way children eat when the food in front of them matters, when they are genuinely hungry and genuinely grateful. And that distinction is visible in every movement. He looked at the twins. He looked at Olivia. He looked at the apartment. The speech did not come. What came instead was the specific physical sensation of a person who has been entirely wrong about something. Not a small error, but a fundamental misreading of a situation. A failure to understand what was actually happening in front of him. The anger that had been powering him since he watched the footage did not leave exactly, but it lost all of its direction, all of its certainty. What replaced it was something much more uncomfortable, something that was guilt and shame, and a kind of grief for the assumption he had made and the speech he had practiced, and the version of Olivia that had existed only in his head on the drive over. He tried to speak twice. Both times, what came out was inadequate. He finally managed to say that he was sorry, that he had made a mistake, that he should not have come, that he was truly, genuinely sorry. He drove home in silence. He did not play the speech. He sat with what he had seen, which was not what he had expected to see, which was the most important thing he had learned in a very long time. He did not sleep. He sat in his living room and thought about Olivia and about Noah and Liam, whose names he did not know yet, eating cold restaurant food at a table with a cracked linoleum floor, and about the way Olivia had looked at him from the doorway, and about the assumption he had made about what he would find. In the morning, he called her into his office. She came in with the particular posture of someone who expects to be fired. He recognized it because he had been on the other side of that posture many times, had sometimes been the cause of it, and seeing it now in Olivia did not sit easily. He asked her to sit down. He said her name. He said it carefully, like he understood it had weight. He did not fire her. He told her that what he had seen the night before had stayed with him, that he had thought about it all night, that he understood now what had been happening and why, and that he was ashamed of the way he had arrived at her door. He slid an envelope across the desk. Inside was a cash bonus, significant, more than she made in a month, and a letter confirming that her children would receive a meal from the restaurant every day, brought home by her at the end of every shift, officially, with his full knowledge and full support. Olivia looked at the envelope and then at him, and he could see her trying to determine whether it was real. He told her it was real. She held herself together through the meeting and cried in the stairwell afterward, which she told him about much later, and which he found entirely understandable. There was more to the story of the King's Crown, as there always is. When Stephen went back through the camera footage more carefully, now looking with different eyes, with more patience and more willingness to understand what he was actually seeing rather than what his anger wanted him to see, he found the real theft. It was Fred. The chef who had made the stray dog jokes, who had laughed at Olivia in the kitchen. Fred, who owed money to people who were not patient about being owed money, who had been skimming from the restaurant in ways that were more sophisticated than a dishwasher leaving with a bag of leftover food. Stephen had every justification to prosecute. He had the footage, the numbers, the evidence. He chose instead to pay the debt, anonymously, through channels that required nothing of Fred except that he stop, and that he understand what had been done for him. He did not tell Olivia about this for a long time. When he finally did, she was quiet for a moment and then said, "That's a very expensive act of kindness." He said, "I had recently been given a very significant reminder that I don't always see situations clearly when I'm angry." What happened after that happened the way real things happen. Not in a single dramatic moment, but slowly, in the accumulation of smaller ones. Stephen began appearing at the restaurant during Olivia's shifts, not to supervise, but simply because it was where he spent his evenings. He began talking to her. He met Noah and Liam, who were cautious with him in the specific way of children who have learned that the world is not always safe. He earned their trust slowly, with consistency and patience, and the particular quality of attention that children recognize as genuine. He fell in love with all three of them. Not at once, not dramatically, but in the quiet and steady way of something that has taken root. 2 years later, the apartment with the cracked linoleum and the wobbling table was a memory. The house they moved into had a kitchen large enough for 5 people to cook in at once, which they did every Sunday, and a backyard where Noah had planted a vegetable garden, and Liam had claimed a corner for his model rockets. Stephen adopted the twins legally on a Thursday in October, and Noah cried at the courthouse and pretended he had something in his eye, which everyone graciously accepted. Olivia still thought about Wyatt. She always would. She thought about him most in the moments of abundance, the Sunday kitchen, the backyard, the boys asleep in rooms that were warm and dry and entirely their own, and she thought, he would have loved this. He would have built things in the yard and driven Noah and Liam to their activities and sat at the kitchen table with the coffee going and been exactly, completely where he belonged. She carried him with her. She let herself be happy. Both of these things were true at the same time, and she had learned that they were allowed to be. I want to leave you with what this story means to me, because I have thought about it a great deal. We talk about wealth as though it is a number, as though the measure of a person's value and their capacity to contribute to the world is legible in what they own or what they earn. We forget, or perhaps we never learn, that the most significant things that happen between people have nothing to do with what is in a bank account. They have to do with whether you can look past your own anger long enough to see what is actually in front of you. Whether you are willing to sit with the discomfort of having been wrong. Whether you have the capacity to let what you see change you. Stephen Brooks arrived at Olivia's door prepared to destroy someone. What he left with instead was a completely different understanding of himself and of the world. And in the years that followed, that understanding became the foundation of everything good that happened to him. Olivia worked in the back of a restaurant, invisible in the steam and the noise, surviving on the margins of other people's excess. She was never invisible. She was never small. She was doing the most profound thing a person can do, quietly and without recognition, every single night. She was keeping her children alive. That is not a small thing. That is the whole thing. That is everything.